I was dropping off like it's
no.
perfect. I can look
We good?
Anyways, no.
What do you have on the screen? Because I can't see.
Can you see that or no?
It was on my screen here.
Say it again.
It was on the screen here, but now it shows some funky split screen.
It's not that bad, right?
Shows what?
It's just
And I felt something. So I was looking here. But I was like, talking like to see if there was like one. Yeah. I was like, there's no bites.
Here it is.
Do you still have video of me or just that?
I'm sorry?
Do you have video of me or just that?
I have both.
Both.
So
And the chat.
Okay. I
I
believe. All right, let's get cranking. So we've got. Would you like to go over those questions?
Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah. Yours posted. You did? Yes, I have it. Okay. What type of joint is the sternoclavicular? Saddle. What tethers the distal end of the clavicle, providing the primary support to the AC joint? So AC joint. So what is the principal ligament that holds that down and in place? Corticoclavicular, coracoid process to the clavicle. All right. Which of the following muscles is primarily responsible for glenohumeral internal rotation? So for internal rotation, which of our rotator cuff muscles is responsible for internal rotation? Subscapularis. So infraspinatus, teres minor, all external rotators. What bone articulates with the acromion process to make up the subacromial arch? Clavicle, right? So AC joint, acromioclavicular, the clavicle. What is the function of the subclavius? So first rib up into the clavicle, it depresses it, holds it down, pulls it down. Which ligament restricts elevation of the proximal clavicle? So costoclavicular is that first tether, that closest, most proximal tether that holds it down, inferior. What is the role of the infraspinatus muscle? External rotation. Which of the following acts on the humerus to create motion at the glenohumeral joint? Options: serratus anterior, levator scap, teres major, pectoralis minor. Oh, everybody's rolling dice on that one. 3 of those are scapular stabilizers. The question is asking, which one crosses the glenohumeral joint? So, what are the muscles of scapular stabilization? That's rotator cuff. Sits as rotator cuff. What are the muscles of scapular stabilization? Trapezius is 1. How many are there? 6. Rhomboid major, rhomboid minor, levator scapula, pectoralis minor, serratus anterior. Option A, serratus anterior. Option B, levator scap. Option D, pectoralis minor. 3 of those are scapular stabilizers. So the 4th one, teres major, goes inferior angle. Across the shaft of the humerus. Maybe. Who wants to come play with us? No. So keep things in groups. Keep things, we've got rotator cuffs, sits, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis. Scapular stabilizers. Good night. Working like it's a Monday. Scapular stabilizers. There's pec minor, ribs 3 through 5 up to coracoid process, anterior tipping. On the back side, we've got trapezius, rhomboid major, rhomboid minor, levator scap, and we gotta get deep. Oops, not that deep. There we go. Much better. Straightest anterior. Good. So there's your teres major right there. Inferior angle of the scapula out to the shaft of the humerus. Crosses the glenohumeral joint. The rest of those, scapular stabilizers. What ligament helps to stabilize the glenohumeral joint by attaching two landmarks on the same bone? Coracoacromial, right? So the acromion process comes around. Coracoacromial finishes off that root. Helps keep that humeral head in place and helps it translate it down during abduction. What originates at the supraglenoid tubercle? Biceps brachii long head originates there. Good. All right. So how are we doing? There's a lot of red on that. We're a week in. We've got like 3 weeks to go before that next test. Then you got like a week after that. And then you're done with me. It's the plan anyways. All right, so we got to add in some bursa because we like bursa, right? So first one we're going to play with, subcutaneous acromial bursa. Under the skin, sits on top of the AC joint. Gives a little bit of cushion, a little bit of padding, a little bit of love. Underneath the acromion is one conveniently called the subacromial bursa. So we have a subcutaneous acromial bursa and we have a subacromial bursa. Next one down is a deltoid bursa, subdeltoid bursa. Pretty good? So look at that subacromial space. We have this archway. The acromion comes across. There's your coracoacromial ligament right there. And it creates this gap, this roof to the humeral head. Through there, there's some soft structures, soft tissues. You've got, initially, we've got the subacromial bursa that sits there. That kind of protects the soft squishies underneath it from the bone itself, from the acromion. So when we discuss humeral motion, it rotates, but it also translates. Remember that conversation a few times over? So if we're going up with the arm, then that humerus is sliding down. Well, there's a few ways if that humerus isn't locked in place, if that humerus doesn't do that well, that we can kind of, if it's shifting too much, then we're going to start impacting some of these soft structures, these soft tissues in here. So paying attention to the structures, recognizing what lives under that subacromial space becomes important because we can hurt them, damage them, injure them, tear them up, like a rotator cuff tear. As we degrade it, if that humeral head is grinding it up into the acromion. or if it's shifting down and it's getting graded across the glenoid itself, we can create some damage to these pieces. So subacromial bursa is the first one that lives in that space. There's 3. What muscle's in there? What muscle crosses underneath that acromion to then act on the humerus? Want to take a shot at it? Middle delts, so the delts are going to go over the top. So what's underneath? So we've resected off the deltoids, right? So anterior delt comes from the distal clavicle and around into the deltoid tuberosity. We have the middle delt that's coming pretty much over the AC, but distal clavicle, distal acromion down, and then spinous scap and around is posterior delt. We take all of that off. You can see that acromion. You can see that subacromial bursa. What's that? The supraspinatus. If I grab that one right there, you can see that supraspinatus, supraspinous fossa passes directly under that AC joint and inserts into that greater tuberosity. Lift up. The humeral head translates with it too much or doesn't translate downward inferiorly enough, then we're going to grind that thing up into that bone. It is possible to have an acromion that hooks downward. So this piece right here, it's possible to have like a little hook on the end of it. So when you go up, it digs into that hook. So subacromial decompression, we go in and we take a Dremel. We shave down your acromion to make it smooth, so we take off that pressure. What's the third structure? Subacromial bursa, supraspinatus muscle. There's a tendon in there as well. What tendon is in there? The subscap is going to come from underneath, from the anterior surface of subscapular fossa. So it's well away from that. What's going up into that space, up underneath that acromion? Biceps brachii long head. Originates supraglenotubercle, comes out and then down the intertubercular groove. So there's a couple different ways to have impingement, but from a hooked acromion to an unstable scapula. But we need to understand what lives in that subacromial space to know what to expect and how to make that diagnosis. Good? What are the muscles of the rotator cuff? Subscap, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor. We've been over scapular stabilizers. How many muscles outside of rotator cuff cross over and act on the glenohumeral joint? What's left? How many of them are there? Teres major is one of them. What are the others? And how many are there? There are 7 of them. So, what's the one that goes over the top? Deltoid. Deltoid goes over the top. 3 bellies, anterior, middle, posterior delt. Then we have 3 in the front, 3 in the back. Teres major is the first one that was said, I think. So let's jump into the back. Teres major is in the back. What else is in the back to help with extension and horizontal abduction? Latissimus dorsi, triceps, long head. How many heads on the triceps are there? 3, good. Well done. Medial and lateral head are coming off the shaft itself, so they don't cross the glenohumeral joint. They don't have an action at the glenohumeral joint. So posteriorly, Teres major, latissimus dorsi, long head triceps. Anteriorly, what do we have? Pec major, most obvious and easiest. Coracobrachialis, coracoid process, shaft of the humerus. And then biceps brachii, is it long head or short head? Oh, you jerk, it's both. Quit trying to trick us. Talking to me, not you. It's both. It is both. Long head and short head. Good? What's the origin of short head? Coracoid process. What is the origin of long head? Supraglenoid tubercle. What is the origin of triceps brachii long head? Infraglenoid tubercle. You feeling okay? It's been a long weekend. You got brushed up now. We're all good? All right. Shoulder motion. How many degrees of abduction do we get out of the whole shoulder? 180 degrees. How much of that is specific to the glenohumeral joint? 120. It's the same numbers for forward flexion as well. How many degrees do we get in full shoulder abduction? 180. And how many do we get in just glenohumeral motion? 120. What's the difference between 180 and 120? 60. Where do we get the 60 from? Scapular rotation. What allows that scapula to rotate? What other joints work? AC. How many degrees do we get in elevation there? 30. You've maxed that, and then you start pushing up above. And where do we get motion after that? SC. So right, we get 30 at AC, and we get 30 at SC. 30 gives us 60 degrees of rotation. 60 plus 120 gives us the 180. First 15 degrees of abduction comes from what muscle? So abduction is principally deltoid, but a different muscle initiates that. What muscle initiates abduction? Supraspinatus does. Less of a rotator and more of that abductor. The four SITS muscles, the four rotator cuff muscles together, have a secondary function. You can potentially argue that it's more primary. What is its other function? They stabilize the humeral head against the glenoid, right? So they're stabilizing that humeral head, compressing it into and holding that humeral head into the glenoid. That cuff reaches around together and drags it in, giving compression. Good? Awesome. So that gives us the elbow. Elbow. What type of joint is this? Hinge. It opens, it closes, it flexes, it extends. It's got a secondary motion of pronation, supination. But only because it's kind of a complex joint. It's three joints that make up one. We have humerus into ulna, humerus into radius, and then radius into ulna. Good? The humeral-ulnar joint makes up what we think of as a hinge joint, that opening and closing, flexion, extension. So you can reach down and touch the point of your elbow. That's your ulna, not your humerus. So take your hand like that. This is your ulna. Humerus plugs in like this. So ulna, humerus just slides inside. Okay? So let's grab that a little bit. We're going to grab the ulna. I need that. So there you go. That's your ulna. That's your elbow. That's this, sitting right here. So the olecranon drops from the back side of it. So this is the back side of your elbow. Trochlear notch. Coronoid process. Coronoid. Not to be confused with coracoid, which is in the shoulder. Or conoid, which is the part of the coracoid ligament. All right? I'm not trying to be confusing here or anything. Good. So flexion extension, we go 150 degrees of flexion. What's the end feel? What's the end point with elbow flexion? Squishy. Hopefully not too squishy, but it's soft, right? Why is it soft? What structure is our limiting function factor if it's soft end feel? Muscle. So that 150 is plus or minus depending upon the individual. The more muscle, the more limitation we have. It is conceivable to have an end feel that is hard at the elbow. We have this coronoid process. There's a coronoid fossa on the anterior humerus. So in extreme emaciation, you can actually get to where that coronoid process locks into the humerus because there's no muscle or very little muscle to stop that. So disease state. All right. Other side, we have the olecranon. We have this landmark sitting right back in here. Put that back in context with the bone. And the back side of the humerus has the olecranon fossa. So the olecranon locks into it to give us an end point that is at 0 at full extension. Some folks can get to -5. They go a little bit of a hyperextension. But norm is 0 to 150 at the elbow. What type of end feel would this be? Hard. I have the olecranon process locking into the olecranon fossa. So a couple more landmarks. So anterior humerus, this little indentation is your coronoid fossa, which receives the coronoid process. Easy enough. If I flip that around, big pink section here, the olecranon fossa receives the olecranon process. The inside, the articular surface is called the trochlea, which means that that space on the inside of the ulna is the trochlear notch. So the last little piece that we have running out to the side. Oh, not that one, sorry. I want that one. There we go. So laterally, there's an articular surface called the capitula. And this is the articular surface for the radius. So this gets into that the humeroradial joint. Oh, let's try it again. There we go. Ish. Good? All right, so let's clean up a couple other little spots real quick. I want you to find the shaft of your humerus. Now you'll notice if you push too much on the medial side, you can find the biceps brachii, you can go inferior to that, and then you're pushing into the bone. It's usually not the most comfortable thing, right? Now if you feel gently, you'll find the brachial artery. If you push pressure, you're actually going to pin that brachial artery against the bone. First aid, this is where you apply pressure to help stem some bleeding. Probably a good thing to know. There's also some nerves that run through there. Yeah, there's nothing like getting pushed on. Below that, inferior to that, or posterior to that, is going to be your triceps. So in between, feel that shaft, feel it flare out. You can feel it swell as you get to the condyles, medial and lateral. Quite a bit more pronounced. Once you find those condyles, if you go just across that joint line, so we go here, it flares, find the medial condyle, lateral condyle, go just across that joint line or on top of that joint line, now make a fist. And all of a sudden, every bit of that soft squish just bulged up, just got taut. Now, if you extend your wrist, you'll feel it get taut on the lateral side. If you flex, you'll feel it get taut on the medial side. Common flexor origin on the medial side, common extensor origin on the lateral. It's going to simplify a whole lot of life when we do origin insertion for forearm musculature. Good? Now, humeroradial joint. So find that. Find the lateral epicondyle, find the lateral condyle, find that swelling from that diaphysis to the epiphysis. Step over on that joint line, find the joint line, and if you stroll back, if you kind of strum back and forth, you should be able to feel a little bit of a gap before you get onto your radial head. So when you find that radial head, pronate and supinate. And you can actually feel the radial head pivot under your fingers as it rotates. So that's your second motion, right? It's this pivoting, which gives us the crossing of the radius and ulna. It's the pivot here. Good? That's why anatomical position has your hands facing forward, because it's the position that keeps those bones aligned without overlap. So the last joint we have is the radial ulnar joint, which is that anchoring that radial head into the ulna where it pivots, nestle in with the ulna. It doesn't move around much. It doesn't separate. Good? All right, so we need to stabilize this thing. Joint capsule. Synovial joint, you get rid of that. Medial side first. Good. All right. So, ulnar collateral ligament, UCL. Ulnar collateral ligament is going to prevent against which force? Valgus or Varus? So, medial side, UCL restricts against valgus or Varus force? Valgus. Valgus force. So a force from the outside directed inward prevents me from going like that. It prevents the ulna and the humerus from opening up. There are three bands to this: the anterior, posterior, and transverse. So palpate back to your diaphysis, find the medial condyle, go just below, get the contraction, feel the muscle belly, that common flexor origin. Slide your finger back and behind, so you're basically working your way around that muscle attachment, and in there is that's anterior band of UCL. It's not a definitive structure that you can really identify like the LCL, to where you know you're on it. But if you have an injury there and that's where you're palpating, that's where you're going to elicit some pain. So you're on it without really being able to differentiate it. Now, if you go just behind it, you'll notice that's kind of your spot for your funny bone. When you go and whack this on a chair or on a table, so what is the funny bone? It's actually the ulnar nerve. It's a nerve that runs through here in that ulnar groove right there. And so it feels funky in that rating, tingling, numb kind of off. You're smacking a nerve. It's a technical term, smacking. Smacking a nerve. So it's this nerve that runs right back into here. Hooks it behind. And you go whack it with a table, a chair, or a sibling. And it just starts feeling fun. All right. So anterior band, most palpable. Posterior band hides behind it. It's deep. You can't really get to it. Still helps, still supports. I'm going to kick those off because transverse band is a lot like the acromioclavicular. It's crossing from ulna to ulna. It's really kind of just creating a deepening of that socket. So it's preventing the humerus from, you're creating a wall from which the humerus cannot slide outward. So it kind of stabilizes that humerus inside that trochlear notch. Good, so those three together, valgus stress helps make sure that this thing stays medially happy and content. So anterior band UCL, that's your Tommy John surgery, for those of you who know it. You will know it. So throw a baseball, and that pressure and that acceleration puts a lot of valgus stress on that elbow, and we tend to stress and open up that anterior band of UCL. Tommy John was the first MLB player that we tried this experimental surgery with. We're going to go pull palmaris longus tendon out of your left arm and reweave and rebuild your UCL in your right. We did that to save his career. Now we do it on 14-year-olds. And that is an absolute commentary that we are messed up in terms of how we allow kids to have pitch counts that are way too high, way too frequent. All right. Soapbox. I'll get off of it. So we're going to stabilize it medial and stabilize it lateral like we've seen before. Laterally, we've got the RCL, radial collateral ligament. So humerus down to the radius prevents varus stress, prevents it opening up to the outside world. But which joint is the principal joint that is our hinge joint for the elbow? Humero-ulnar. So we actually have a reinforcement laterally for the humero-ulnar joint. So this is your RCL, except visible body it cheats us a little bit because the posterior third of the RCL actually inserts into the ulna. And it's called the LUCL, lateral ulnar collateral ligament.
Sorry, what does this stand for again?
Lateral UCL, ulnar collateral ligament. So LUCL. So humero-ulnar joint is stabilized medially by the UCL. Laterally, well, there's this big chunk of bone called the radius there, which kind of helps. And then we have the RCL, but we've got fibers that run back to laterally stabilize humerus to ulna. So what? Sorry. It's two different pieces. Yeah, we've kind of taken one tissue and there's a name that's specific for the humero-ulnar components of it. Okay, so consider them two separate ligaments, because you can damage them independent of one another. So this one tends to get damaged when we have a dislocation of the elbow. The lateral ulnar collateral ligament will get damaged with the dislocation of the elbow. So what does it look like? It stabilizes in pronation with extension. So when you do that motion, when I grab a steering wheel, when I push a door open, if I fall on it, if I'm getting up from a chair and I turn in and push down, so you can imagine that would be a little bit disruptive to life. Good? So you need to consider, if you've got an elbow dislocation, that this very easily could be a concern. So it's a ligament you need to understand, because you can and will see injuries to it. All right, so UCL has how many bands? 3, anterior, posterior, transverse. Laterally, we have the RCL, radial collateral ligament, and we have the LUCL, that stabilizes the lateral humero-ulnar joint. So what's the last joint that we haven't done much with? Radial ulnar, which is this. So we have a band that goes from the ulna around the radial neck to the ulna. It's kind of a sling that wraps around the neck and allows us to pivot for that pronation supination. Annular ligament, annual, cyclical, ring, recurrent. It's a ring. It is a band, annulus fibrosus, right? So annular ligament wraps around and holds that in place. Injury here called a nursemaid's elbow to a young child. So kids walk between mom and dad, and they each have an arm. So the kid's like, "Woo, swing me!" The parent's like, "Sure, why not?" And you grab the arm, and mom picks up, and dad picks up, and we start swinging kiddo. So grip, distraction force, dislocates radial head from annular ligament. Now you have a screaming, crying child. And child protection services are knocking at your door. So, reduction isn't a nightmare. You actually just kind of get them into flexion with a little bit of pronation. It'll slide right back in. Kid's going to be hurt a little bit. I want to see an orthopedic. But a little less likely that ER is like CPS on you. So, one of my old pediatricians actually taught me that story. Just saying. All right, so. How do you put it back in? Okay, good enough. Pediatrician taught me. Thank you. All right. So now we got to move this thing. We have flexion, we have extension. So flexion, we'll do it first. One of those muscles we've talked about a bunch already. What is it? Biceps brachii. Long head, short head. They all come together in one big happy mess down distal. So you see down here, there's this big old bump right here. Big bump right there, called the radial tuberosity. So take your arm, flex it, palpate that biceps brachii, go distal, follow it down, and you're going to find this cool cord right in the middle of your elbow. That's your biceps brachii tendon. And it's dropping right down into radial tuberosity. Good. This is actually called the hook test. So if you think somebody may have ruptured it, you get them to contract, you fish in there to try to find, you try to hook that tendon, and if it's squishy and not there, it's a positive test. Good? All right, so palpate down. I want you to hold that biceps brachii, go into flexion, tighten up, and then supinate. And you will feel ever so slightly a little bit more contraction, a little bit more definition come in. Biceps brachii assists with supination. All right, so manual muscle test, we're going to check them. Biceps brachii is here, palms up. Muscle number 2, go full pronation. Contract, lift it up. Go ahead and palpate on one side, and you're going to feel that biceps brachii isn't firing nearly as hard. But underneath it is brachialis. If I go, that, there's a muscle that. Just kidding. Muscle. There we go. All right, so there's the short head. And it's gone. There's long head. And it's gone. And there we go. Brachialis. So it sits right underneath. Coming off a shaft. Insertion, ulnar tuberosity, and anterior surface of coronoid process. And if we get rid of it, then we get to see the bone. How many muscles did I say were there? 3. Here's what I want. I want you to neutral position. Neutral in between. So pronation, supination. We go 90 degrees pronation, 90 degrees supination. So get neutral. And take one hand and tuck it under the lip of your table. And lift up. Where do you see that pronounced? Where do you see that contraction? You see it right there in your forearm. This is brachioradialis. This is your drinking muscle. So, 12-ounce can of Coke, that's your drinking muscle. If you injure it, need to modify exercise, you can lighten that 12 ounces up to like an 8-ounce glass of something else. Water. If it's really injured and you got to start really low, you can settle that down to a 1-ounce sip of water. It's your drinking muscle. Good. So, biceps brachii here, brachioradialis here, brachialis here. Fully supinated biceps brachii, neutral position, brachioradialis. So brachioradialis is originated. You can find it because you can feel that origination point because it's much, much lower. It's on that lateral condyle. It inserts down at the very distal end of the radius on the lateral aspect. You can see most of it all the way down. The distal radius has a styloid process. It runs along that line. All right, one more cool thing about biceps though. So this is your biceps. Ooh. This is your biceps brachii. It's dropping into that hook test. You can feel where it goes into that radial tuberosity. But then you see like this ectoplasm ghost snot coming down here in the drawing. It's called the bicipital aponeurosis. Here, I'll let you spell it off of that. What does that mean? It means that there's fibers that are coming off from the tendon, off from the fascia that are in and around the biceps that grab around the forearm soft tissue. So rather than just having a singular bony point of attachment, it's actually going down, but then kind of integrating with all the soft tissue. So that elbow flexion is pretty pronounced. It's grabbing not just bone to lift, but everything at once to help make sure that we have a solid, forceful contraction possible. It's pretty cool. All right, so other side, we've got extension. What was the origin of triceps long head? Infraglenoid tubercle. We also have a medial and a lateral head. All three of those go into the triceps tendon. The triceps tendon inserts into which bone? What's its function? What's its action? Extension of the elbow. So if it crosses into the humerus, then it wouldn't cross the elbow. So what bone is it inserting to? The ulna. So the olecranon process right in through here. So that triceps tendon crosses the humeral-ulnar joint, inserts into the olecranon. So you can feel it go full extension, and then you can, as you flex and relax, you can feel the tension in that triceps tendon come and go. The olecranon process of the ulna. So if I get rid of triceps, then all I see left is bone. And it leaves us this guy. Oops, not that one. With that one, the encodings. So hiding in the back, it doesn't really have the size to be a strong elbow extender. It's also coming at kind of an oblique angle. So think of it much more like the popliteus of the knee. What was the function of the popliteus? It unlocked the screw mechanism. It grabbed that tibia and internally, medially rotated it so we could do some flexion extension. So anconeus is going to function some of the same way. As it goes from the humerus down to the ulna, it's going to rotate, it's going to help stabilize that ulna as we go through flexion extension. So does it have line of pull to assist in extension? Probably, yes. But I think it's much more related to a stabilizing, supporting role than a primary extender. All right, so next step is to get into the muscles of the forearm. So there's quite a few that we will play with, and we'll do that next class. The muscles of the forearm is flexion, extension of the wrist, finger motions. So when we had the muscles of the lower leg, the compartments of the calf, the compartments of the lower leg, that control ankle mobility, that control the medial longitudinal arch of the toes, flexion, extension. It's going to be synonymous here to where it's these muscles that control our strength through here. Good? There's a few of them, to say the least. We'll play with that on a different day. We good? If you don't have class tomorrow morning, I'll be in at 9 o'clock to work with anybody who would like to. Just to know.
I told my mother? Yes, she's a teacher. I was making sure you know. You're so mean. I can't compliment. Oh, wait, so you're so. Because you call me different things. You're such a weirdo. You're so funny. I mean
Yeah.
He's calling me.
That's
Nah.